This is Dale Wetzel. I'm the host of the Legislature Today radio show. We're broadcasting this evening from the Peacock Alley American Bar and Grill in downtown Bismarck. In fact, we broadcast from here most evenings. This is our kind of permanent location. And this evening, we're going to be speaking later on about speeding fines. We're going to be talking about speeding fines with a couple of legislators who are going to be with us later on. In the meantime, we should bring you up to speed about what's going on in the legislature right now. Today, the House Government and Veterans Affairs Committee, which has jurisdiction over state pension legislation, was listening to a bill that would increase contributions to the state government pension fund. The big one is called the main fund. There are separate funds for law enforcement officers and Supreme Court and district judges and other smaller groups of folks. But the main pension fund is the one that gets the most attention because it is the largest, it has the most assets, and it covers the most workers. There's been a rescue plan in place for the fund since it took a dive back in 2008 when there was the nation's financial crisis. And since then, the fund has been trying to rebuild its assets, and one of the elements of this is to ask the legislature to approve greater contributions to the fund. There were greater contributions approved 2 years ago, and this year the legislature is being asked to kick in some more. And what we mean by greater contributions is the state employee would pay 1% extra of his or her salary into the fund in 2014 and in 2015, and state government would match that 1% contribution, which means the taxpayers would put in another 2% over 2 years into the pension fund. The director of the North Dakota Public Employees the North Dakota Public Employees Retirement System. His name is Barb Collins. He was testifying in front of the committee today about the need for this and the fact, according to him, that if the legislature does not approve a continuation of this rescue plan, that it will put the pension fund, further behind the eight ball. He believes that if these contributions are approved, that eventually the fund will be return to health, and that perhaps the tax rates will be able to be lowered sometime in the fairly distant future as the fund recovers. What the problem is now is that the fund does not have enough money to pay all of the benefits that it believes it will have to pay. This doesn't mean that the fund is in danger of running out of money anytime soon. But in the longer term, and I'm talking about 25 years or more, it is in danger of going dry. And so there are steps being taken at the present time to try to head off that eventuality. And the ideal situation is to have the pension fund at 100% funded, which means that it's got enough money to pay all of the present and future expected benefits of pension beneficiaries. And right now the fund is closer to 60% funded, which means that it's 40 cents short on every dollar it owes to present and future beneficiaries. And so that is one of the reasons why, it's the big reason why there's been a request to add more money to these funds, and the House will decide whether or not it wants to continue the path it started down 2 years ago as far as contributing more money to the state employee pension funds. Another bill had to do with humane treatment of animals. This has been a controversial bill amongst agricultural groups. The North Dakota Farm Bureau started out supporting the measure, but now it is no longer doing so. The organization is professed now to be neutral on this bill. What it does is it institutes a felony crime of animal cruelty. That's one of the things it does. North Dakota right now, the stiffest penalty for animal mistreatment or animal cruelty specifically is a Class A misdemeanor, which is a year in county jail and a $2,000 fine maximum. North Dakota is one of the few states in the Union that does not have a felony penalty for animal cruelty, and that is what this bill would do. That is its highlight. It would create a new Class C felony crime of animal cruelty, and a Class C felony can be punished by up to 5 years in prison and up to a $5,000 fine. There was testimony today during the hearing about whether the provisions that spell out what animal cruelty is are precise enough to withstand scrutiny by a court of review. One attorney was making the argument that the provisions of the bill are so vague that the livestock producer, for example, would not know whether or not he is violating this law, and the vagueness of a law can be grounds for throwing it out entirely as unenforceable. And we'll see how that debate goes along. I mean, the North Dakota Senate has already approved this bill unanimously, and it has a great deal of support from a broad coalition of organizations, and so we will see what happens to it. One of the things that is mentioned often in the debate about this bill is an incident in Burleigh and Morton counties where a person by the name of Bill Kiefer is accused of letting a number of horses starve to death, not taking care of them, and as a result they starved to death or died of essentially of neglect. And Mr. Kiefer last year advertised himself as a write-in candidate for the U.S. Senate, so you may have seen a few of his billboards along the highway. There was at least one in Bismarck itself, and apparently the gentleman had money to spend on billboards but not on feed for his horses. There is a large debate going on in the legislature right now about something called the Outdoor Heritage Fund. And what this is a pot of money that would come from oil taxes, a share of the oil tax revenue that North Dakota collects. And this money would be used for promoting water quality, flood control, wildlife and fish habitat, conservation of natural areas. There are two competing proposals here. One of them is sponsored by the chairman of the House Natural Resources Committee. His name is Todd Porter. He's a state representative and a Republican from Mandan. The other is sponsored by a group of Democrats. The primary sponsor, his name is Tyler Axness. He is a state senator from Fargo and a new legislator. And the Republican bill, which was introduced, which was promoted by the governor, Jack Dalrymple, in his budget address, would set aside $30 million every 2 years for this Outdoor Heritage Fund. And the State Industrial Commission, which is made up of the governor, the attorney general, and the agriculture commissioner, would make decisions on how this money would be spent, and they would be advised by an advisory board that would consist of representatives of the constituencies that would be interested in spending money on conservation and water quality and those sorts of things. The second proposal is a constitutional amendment, and it would set aside up to $200 million every 2 years for this Outdoor Heritage Fund. It would also be supervised by a board, but it would be a much larger board than the Industrial Commission. It would be a 10-member board that includes the governor, the agriculture commissioner, the game and fish director. There would also be 4 legislators. And this would be a constitutional amendment, not a law, so it would be more difficult to change if voters approved it. It is somewhat similar to an initiated measure that was offered last year by a group of conservation organizations, and they were led by Steve Adair, who is the regional director for Ducks Unlimited in Bismarck. this effort to put an initiative on the ballot to establish an outdoor heritage fund collected more than 30,000 signatures, but it did not make the ballot. This proposal did not make the ballot because some of those signatures were discovered to have been fraudulently collected, specifically by members of the present and former members of the North Dakota State University football team. And this led to the demise of that particular initiative, and now it is being revived. A form of it is being revived in the legislature. Another thing that was of interest in the legislature today is a debate about speeding fines. And we will have some folks on later in the show to talk about speeding fines. Right now, North Dakota's speeding fines are a bit low. I think everyone agrees, even those who have paid speeding fines, I think would agree that compared with other states, especially that North Dakota's speeding fines are quite low. And also fines for such things as running a stop sign or a stoplight, they're quite low as well. Running a stop sign costs you $20. And speeding 85 miles an hour on the interstate highway, where the limit is generally 75 miles an hour, will cost you $50, whereas in North Dakota, whereas in Minnesota it will cost you at least double that, the same in South Dakota. The Senate Transportation Committee is looking at a bill that would simplify North Dakota's speeding fines. Right now it's a rather complex schedule. It depends on whether the road you're driving on has a speed limit of 55 miles an hour or 65 or 70 or 75 miles an hour. It's complicated. In fact, highway patrol troopers have to carry a reasonably large chart in their cars to figure out what the fines are for each offense. What this change would do would be if you are driving on a highway where the speed limit is 65 miles an hour or lower and you're caught speeding, your fine will be $2 for every mile per hour you're driving over the limit. I'll say, for example, if you're driving on a highway where the limit is 55 miles an hour and you're driving 60 miles an hour and you're flagged for that, your fine would be $10 because you're driving 5 miles an hour over the speed limit times 2 is $10. Fairly easy to figure out. And if you're driving on a road where the speed limit is greater than 65 miles an hour, your penalty is $5 for every mile per hour you're going over the speed limit, and you can do the math. But the big element of this bill is the fact that it would allow local governments that already have the authority to impose their own traffic ordinances, and these are called home rule cities. If they have the authority to do this, then they can raise their fines more than what the state does. Right now, under state law, cities such as Bismarck and Fargo and Grand Forks and Minot cannot charge more for traffic offenses than the state does. And so in other words, the state fine for running a stop sign is $20. In Bismarck, it is also $20, even if the city commission would like it to be much more than that. Well, the primary feature of this bill is that it would double the state maximum of a speeding fine. So in other words, if you have a speeding fine of $20 and you committed the same offense in the city of Bismarck, they could jack it up to $40. Or if you ran a stop sign in the city of Bismarck, I'll back up for a moment. Other offenses besides speeding can be tripled. Speeding fines can be doubled by local governments, and other types of violations such as failure to yield, running a stoplight, can be tripled. Right now, this fine for running a stop sign is $20. It could be tripled under this law to $60, and that is another of the proposals that's being batted about in the legislature today. I spent a great deal of my time this afternoon at a meeting of the Board of Higher Education, and at the end of the meeting, the board's student member, whose name is Sidney Hull, he's an NDSU student, a North Dakota State University student, he presented the board members with a sheaf of materials which he said show that the board has been engaging in open meetings violations, and also that this has been encouraged and abetted by the Chancellor, Mr. Ham Shirvani, Dr. Ham Shirvani. And the North Dakota Student Association already is on record as saying that Mr. Shirvani should be shown the door. There have been no confidence votes on his administration by North Dakota State University, the State College of Science at Wahpeton, Minot State University. And the student member of the Board of Higher Education, who is a voting member, he can vote. He is not someone who is an advisor. He is an actual voting member appointed by the governor. At the end of the meeting today at Bismarck State College, he raised his concerns about what he thinks are improper practices by the board and by Chancellor Shirvani. The president of the board, whose name is Dwayne Espegard, he's a retired banker from Grand Forks and a former state senator. He said that these allegations would be looked into. Mr. Hull asked specifically for a meeting of the Board of Higher Education in April next month to discuss these allegations, and Mr. Espegard said that that would be too soon. The meeting will be in May. Another notable aspect of the board meeting is that the board's general counsel described conversations she's had with university presidents in the presence of the schools in North Dakota's university system. There are 11 colleges in the university system, and 10 of them have presidents. The exception is Dakota College at Botno. And she discussed her discussions with the presidents about elements of board policy that deal with the president's contracts, when they can be renewed, for how long they can be renewed, and to what the circumstances under which a president can be cashiered. And so there is a lot of tenseness, I think it's fair to say, at the end of the board meeting, because the presidents are all sitting there listening to this person discuss whether or not, under the conditions under which they can be fired. And also the student board member is challenging the president of the board about alleged open meetings and open records violations by the board. We have with us here this evening Mr. Dustin Goverlow, who's the director of the North Dakota Watchdog Network, and he has a particular interest in higher education, particularly he has opinions about student government and the objectives of student government officials when they're deciding that they don't like the chancellor. Mr. Goverlow, what do you think that the student governments of these institutions decided on their own that they didn't like the chancellor and wanted him to be tossed out, or do you think that they had help from somebody else?
Well, thanks, Dale. From my time in college, I attended college at BSC and Dickinson State from 2000 to 2005, and between that and afterwards observing this, it's been my experience that the student government types that get involved find themselves becoming puppets of the college administration, and it's kind of a social clique more than it is anything else, and it's a way for some students to network and get in with the right crowd and get letters of recommendation. Really is the end goal of being part of student government, and those letters of recommendation are to hopefully someday get a internship with the governor or a senator or something to that effect. And what it really does is it drives the students who are involved in student government to basically do whatever the college presidents want them to do. And in this situation, I don't know exactly the particulars of it, not knowing the direct correlation between the folks involved at the student government level, but there's a long-term pattern that had been set that is basically how student government individuals that get involved operate. And it really is an interesting situation now. You've got the student representative on the board basically accusing the board president and other board members of improprieties in an attempt to take down the chancellor. And, there's not very many college students that have the resources to be able to come up with this kind of information. And I've taken a look at the PDF documents, and, there's some interesting stuff in there, to say the least, not to mention the comments by Pat Seaworth, the legal counsel of the Board of Higher Ed, talking about how various things do violate policies when it comes to open records. And, a lot of people who understand these things know that North Dakota's open records laws are pretty lax and don't really hold a lot of teeth when it comes to various things. So it's definitely an interesting development in this whole saga that's been going on for the better part of a decade now. And,
is it fair to say, I'm assuming from your statement that you believe, even if you may not have no evidence, but you believe that this sort of thing, this crusade against the chancellor, is ginned up behind the scenes by the administration?
I would be willing to put money on it that it's an orchestrated case situation, that you've got certain campus presidents that are disliking the chancellor, and students that are more than willing to be complicit in being a part of that. And it's unfortunate. I think that in the end it's going to hurt the university system and hurt the concept of student government. But on the other hand, it brings to light a lot of these issues that a lot of folks have been talking about for many years.
Okay. We've been speaking, this is Dale Wetzel. I'm the host of the Legislature today, and we've been speaking in the first half hour with Mr. Dustin Goverlow. He's the director of the North Dakota Watchdog Network, a former director of the North Dakota Taxpayers Association. And in our coming up next, we will be speaking to Senator Tom Campbell of Grafton. He's a Republican, and Andy Peterson, who is the president of the North Dakota Chamber of Commerce, about speeding fines and other issues. We'll also be speaking to Representative Dan Ruby, who is the chairman of the House Transportation Committee. Good evening. This is Dale Wetzel. I'm the host of the Legislature today. We're coming to you from the Peacock Alley American Bar and Grill in downtown Bismarck, and the place is packed. It's noisy. It looks good. It looks like people are having fun. We have with us this evening for our second half hour, we have Senator Tom Campbell. He is a Republican from Grafton, and he is a member of the Senate Transportation Committee, and the relevance of that will become clear in a moment. We have Representative Dan Ruby, who's a Republican from Minot, and he is the chairman of the House Transportation Committee. Again, the relevance of that will become clear shortly. And we also have Andy Peterson, the president of the North Dakota Chamber of Commerce, the Greater North Dakota Chamber of Commerce, who is a regular Thursday guest on the show to talk about what the legislature is doing and all manner of things. One of the things we wanted to talk about, and the reason for the gentleman from the Transportation Committee, is we're going to talk about speeding fines. There's a proposal in the legislature to discuss to actually increase speeding fines in some categories of speeders. But I think it's fair to say the most important feature of the bill is it allows local governments that have their own traffic ordinances to jack up their speeding fines well beyond what the state has. Representative Ruby, you're the most familiar of all of us with the details of this bill. Can you just explain to us what it does?
Well, the bill changes our current bracket system, where currently we have 3 brackets for speed limits. We have our 55 mile an hour and less speed zones, and our 65 mile an hour speed zone is at a different level, and then we have our above 65 mile an hour speed zone, which is your 75 and 70 and 75, which are your state 4-lane highways and interstates. The bill that we had that came before us from the interim committee took it to 2 brackets, but it raised currently the fine on state 4-lane highway or the interstate is $5 per mile over the speed limit, and it raised that to $6 per mile over the speed limit. And then it had a kind of a complicated bracket system for any speed zone that was 65 or less, and they were substantial increases. I believe the last time I was on your show we were talking about this issue, and we had heard it in the House, and I mentioned that I was going to try work on a different formula setup. And I tried several different ways. I tried to look at the current bracket system they had and work with that. I tried the current one that's in law. I tried a couple of my own, and then what I did was I came up with an idea to just go on 65 mile an hour speed zones and less, just a $3 per mile over the speed limit. It was simply to 2 brackets, and both brackets would be based on just a dollar amount over the speed limit. The committee liked that part of it, but they didn't. Some of them didn't like the increase that was going to be. So the idea was to there was a compromise within our committee. We had a few guys working on some different proposals. We decided to kind of keep that simple bracket and go to a $2 per mile over the speed limit on 65 mile an hour speed zones and less, and then put in an amendment that allowed for cities that are home rule charter to double the fines that the state sets, because right now they're confined to what the state charges for fines. And then for non-moving violations such as running stop signs and failure to yield and that type of stuff, it allows them to triple those fines, because we didn't touch those at all. So the result was we left the 70 and 75 mile an hour speed zones alone at 5 at the existing level. 65 mile an hour, that got put into the same bracket as the other speed zones, and it actually resulted in a decrease over 11 miles an hour over the speed limit. Up to 10 miles an hour, it was pretty much the same. Then it was a decrease after that, and then the trade-off was the 55 mile an hour and less speed zones actually doubled from where they currently were.
Does this affect the points that you get for speeding?
We didn't touch the points at all, and that was one of the reasons why we didn't necessarily want to go along with such an extreme increase in the fines. Now, we do realize that other states charge a lot more than we do, but our residents would have to pay that and take the hit on the points, and then out-of-state drivers would only take the hit on the fine.
We have Andy Peterson with us, who is the president of the Greater North Dakota Chamber of Commerce, and he's really enthusiastic about the fact that the fines aren't going up that much.
Give
us your opinion of this, Mr. Peterson.
Well, I drive an awful lot. I've been to Fargo twice this week already. I just got back before the show. And so, I'm not a real fan of raising the fines up. Obviously, if the fines are going to save somebody's life, that's one thing. But other states, notably Minnesota, California, Wisconsin, they use these fines as a revenue generator. And if you're just a couple miles over the limit, I got picked up in Minnesota for doing 11 miles over the limit. It was like $170. I was shocked at how much that fine was. And sure, I shouldn't have been going over the limit, but $170, it stops me from going to Minnesota. I don't want to go there, and I because I might risk a fine. So I don't want that to happen to the great state of North Dakota. So reasonable fines are good. I do like the point system. It gives a little bit of leeway, and yet I still think it keeps us in a safety zone.
Senator Tom Campbell, you're on the Senate Transportation Committee. You heard this bill this morning. What was the testimony about it?
It was great. It's the first time we heard of it, and I respect Dan for the work they did in the House for all the amendments and the challenges. A couple of things. First of all, I agree with you, Andy, 110%. I come from my philosophy is less government control, less taxes, and I feel that some of the speed limits in Wisconsin or Minnesota, it is in essence a form of taxation when you get to $170 for 11 miles over the speed limit. A couple of things we didn't care for the bill. We're going to probably look at amending. Right now, if you go through a stop sign in Bismarck, it depends. If you get pulled over by the Bismarck cop, it's less of a fine than if you get pulled over by the highway patrolman at the same stop sign. So we want to maybe put some amendment in there where it's the same fine no matter which color uniform the person pulls you over is. That's just kind of a fairness thing. It actually could be challenged the way it is currently right now. Another thing that we didn't care for the bill is, in essence, the problems occur at the higher speed limits. There's more fatalities and more serious injuries, and this bill didn't address that. It addressed the slower speed limits, so it's kind of almost counterproductive for going after the main reason was to deter or increase safety on the roads. My real feeling of it is I just would probably assume do nothing, because I think our speeding rules right now are not increasing it, would not be a deterrent to driving, especially where this bill is at, the little bit of increases. Maybe if you increase it to the Minnesota or Wisconsin levels, but I would be against that as well. I just think that it's a rural state. We have a lot of open highway traveling, and I think majority of the people are responsible enough. And I just don't think the purpose of this bill to deter speeding by increasing the fines, I just don't buy that. And I could be wrong, and I'm open to opinions, but from where I come from, everybody is just like yourself, Andy. Don't raise the speeding fines. Everybody unfortunately likes to increase. You like to drive fast.
Right. Well, and, to that point, I don't have any North Dakota tickets. The only ticket I have on my record is from Minnesota. And Minnesota's one thing, but driving to Wisconsin, I mean, they're horrible as far as their fines are concerned, and you have to pay on the spot. So, it stops people from going into Wisconsin, and once you get that kind of ticket in Wisconsin for a few miles an hour over the limit, you don't go back there. So, again, that would be a detriment to tourism. We don't want to stop that in North Dakota. That's a growing industry. So I think safety is paramount, but I think we have to be reasonable about it.
Just for your information, Andy, I think that your Minnesota ticket won't show up on your North Dakota record. I know it doesn't show up on mine.
I think reciprocity with points that does, though, I believe.
Yeah.
Well,
Senator Campbell, I wanted to ask you, I understand you have some experience driving on the German Autobahn. I was wondering if your experience driving on the German Autobahn makes you maybe a little more skeptical of increased speeding fines.
I don't know who told you that, but that's interesting. You must have been talking to Colonel Prakniak, but we visited with him. We had a Senate bill up about 3 or 4 weeks ago, and it had nothing to do with speeding, but I went up and talked to him, and I think I'm going to wait 2 years, but to increase the speeding limit in certain rural areas of interstate, maybe 5 or 10 or 15 miles an hour, and it'd be well posted. In Germany, as you mentioned, the Autobahn is unlimited speed limits, only in segments where there's the rural parts, and it's an interstate highway just like ours. And our highways, interstate system, I think was designed and built in the 50s with Eisenhower. It was designed for 100-mile-an-hour traffic, especially in rural areas in certain segments in North Dakota. So a lot of people probably won't like me to hear that, but I think, and of course I have safety in mind, and I think if you're going, and here again, I'm not looking at going 160, that's about as fast as the Audi cars will go, the rent-a-cars in Germany you can get. But I tell you what, you don't have to worry about anybody eating a Big Mac or texting when you're going 160 miles an hour. Your safety and your alertness is to the max because you're moving, and so is most of the other traffic in the left lane. So I think maybe 80, 85, 90 in certain segments, rural areas, like maybe 10 miles north of Grand Forks to the Pembina border. Maybe west of Bismarck, there's certain segments there in the daylight hours, and that's something that I'd probably straight traffic in rural areas. Of course, going through cities, or obviously you wouldn't, but in Germany they have that. It's posted. It's not unlimited everywhere. It's just in segments of like a 20-mile segment. They'll have a big sign that's open speeding. You get toward Berlin or Hamburg or some city, you're slowing down to 110 or 120 kilometers, which is about typical speed limits is here. So I think North Dakota's probably ready for it. Yeah. And I think we should think outside the box, and we have a lot of exciting things happening here. Well, and why not be the first to implement something like that?
Texas has done some of that now. There's some spots between Fort Worth and Austin, I understand, that are 85 or 90 miles an hour. So we'll see how they do with it.
I was thinking about the former Montana approach was reasonable and prudent. And reasonable and prudent, I think, I know that I was going 110, the policeman didn't stop me. He just kind of waved. I think he probably wanted me to slow down, but I didn't. And I mean, Montana's reasonable and prudent is kind of famous for no speed limit, is like a euphemism for no speed limit. And they didn't like it when you said that was what it was, but that is kind of what it was. I mean, if you had a nice, clear day, dry pavement, you could drive very fast.
I remember those years well, and then they went through a segment where it was a $5 fine.
Speeding ticket, yes.
And I remember we
Gas,
used to go skiing with our buddies at spring break and to Big Sky,
Yeah.
and we all chip in the hat, throw $5 in the hat, and
Yeah.
didn't have to use it too often. But that was you can get to point A to point B pretty quick with no
Right.
speed limit.
Makes those places closer to us.
You're less time on the road the faster you go. I
That's
don't know
true.
if that philosophy works or not, but
That's true.
So how long do you think it's going to take you to work over the bill and to get it in the shape you want?
Senator Elke's the chairman of it. I'm guessing probably be a week or so. We've got a lot of other stuff we're working on, but we didn't vote on it. We really didn't have much time for discussion today with it, but it'll be probably even as early as tomorrow morning or next week, I'm guessing.
Representative Ruby, what did you think about the criticisms that Senator Campbell mentioned?
Well, I certainly understand where they're coming from, and that's the reason why we didn't increase on the higher speeds, is because we didn't think there was as much a problem. Certainly, if the conditions are right, people are driving. The roads are engineered to be safe at higher speeds, so that's why we didn't really affect them as much. We heard a lot from the cities about deterrence. They did stay away from the revenue issue, and of course, any fine that you get that is on a county road or a state highway goes into the Common Schools Trust Fund. So there's no budget enhancement from that. So we did, we talked more about from the city's aspect, in the 25-mile-an-hour zone, speed zones and things like that, where they're having problems. But a lot of the problems they talked about were the moving violations as well. So that's why we stayed away from that. I don't mind, I do understand that disparity, and I think we used to have that probably as a problem in the past, where depending on which road you were on, it could be a 55-mile-an-hour speed zone, but it depended on who pulled you over and what road you were on, pretty much. And law enforcement had cheat sheets with them on which road they pulled you over on, and then whether it was a county deputy. And we did clean that up years ago, probably 4 or 5 sessions ago, and set it to the 3 brackets that we had, and just based on the speed zones. But then we also did some slight adjustments in the speeding fines, and that's when we actually bumped the 4-lane highways up to 70, and then the interstates to 75, because they had been 70 before. There were some people just thought that was too fast. They'd be out driving their headlights at night, and they would be not feeling safe going that fast. And we had a lot of that discussion, but I know most people do feel comfortable at 80, 85, 90, I suppose. But some of their criticisms, certainly they're valid. We'll see what they do with it. If they could come up with that within the jurisdiction that it's in, wouldn't matter who pulled you over, the fine would be the same. I'd have no problem with that. And we just wait to see what they come up with, and whether we would concur or maybe talk about it in conference committee. It's probably something we just, even if we kind of agree with it, at least put in conference committee and just kind of talk it over and see if it's really what we all want to try get through our caucus.
Was there any discussion at all about whether to raise the speed limits on any roads, particularly the interstate highways?
We didn't have any of that discussion this time. No.
Okay.
I wish that they would give a ticket for the lack of common sense. That really could solve the whole problem.
What would the fine be?
Well, that could be quite large, actually.
Would it? Would there be like gradations of lack of common sense?
There could be. We could come up with something this evening, but
Common Sense Club would probably come up with a lot of that.
I think our tax revenues would probably be close to the oil.
There you go. There you go.
One of the things I thought we could discuss as well is license plates. I mean, in the Department of Transportation budget, there is money for new license plates. Does North Dakota need new license plates, and if so, what should they look like?
Well, that's a great question. I kind of like our license plates. I think they're cool, but I think any state should have an image makeover from time to time, and certainly North Dakota's maybe in that period of growth, so maybe it is time for a new license plate. As long as any revenue that comes from it goes back into road maintenance, I think we would be okay with that.
Well, the appropriations is over $6 million, I believe. So obviously, for some reason, it's going to cost money, but I would assume there would be some recovery on people purchasing the plates. But the Senate did have the new issuance bill, which was killed itself, but then moved into the appropriations budget of DOT. So that kind of took it out of our policy committee on the House side. It'll be dealt with more on the House Appropriations Committee then.
I was just wondering if you had a particular opinion on whether the license plate needs to be replaced.
Yeah, I guess I thought I've always liked our plate too. But I know we killed it a few sessions ago. I think Senator Nething had brought a bill over to the House, and it failed. But perhaps it's time. The other thing is we probably need to get rid of not only the Buffalo plate as we have as our main one, but also I understand they're still making some of the Lewis and Clark plates, and that's something that we can cut down some of that expense by just going to one and sticking with it.
I think it's been 21 or 22 years.
Since 1993 is when the.
And I think it's either make or break, big issue for really anybody. But I think it's time, and I know with the new technology, and it'll be continuous. 40 states that still make them in prisons, and that's something that they're going to continue to do is make it in our penitentiary, which I think is a good thing.
I've been out there and seen them do that. They do a great job with it, and those prisoners that operate those machines have a great deal of investment in making sure they get it done right. So it's a fascinating process to watch.
Well, the technology now is that you could buy a machine that would make them in flat like a lot of states have, where they wouldn't be embossed. But and then you could change your issuance or additional add-ons if you want at very minimal cost compared to what it would be now. But from what I understand, law enforcement is adamant that they want to keep this embossed plate because then they can see the numbers even if it's dirty.
Well, that's another discussion to have. Embossed or flat, which do you like? Senator Campbell, which do you have a preference?
Not necessarily. I guess I've never seen the new one. I know it's digital technology, which in the end is more economical for changes and stuff, and even initial costs. I said is the payback is sooner. But I just really don't have any big preference either way. I think it's more what it looks like. I just want to make sure we don't label it with a specific one end of the state or the other, or I guess a Buffalo or the bat. I would like to have some kind of neutral where everybody could recognize it as a state, not just one segment.
I agree. I think some kind of neutral kind of statement, but I kind of like the flat in some ways because it's reflective, and some of those new reflections are really cool with some of the interior embossments there. Those are kind of cool. But at the same time, these raised letters, there's something to that too. I mean, it's nostalgic on one hand. So I guess I'm arguing against myself.
Would people collect the flat ones someday in the future?
Probably not as much.
Right. Yeah.
You're right.
And not that that's our purpose, but I guess just listening to what law enforcement said about their preference, but I don't know. I'd be interested to hear what other states feel about their law enforcement dealing with those plates if they get as dirty. I mean, that's something that maybe if it doesn't go through with the new issuance this session, maybe we should put in a study to kind of look at that type, because I believe it's $1 million for the machine. But then, like I said, in the future, they can change and tailor plates much cheaper than they can.
What would the prisoners do if we took that away from them?
Build more furniture.
Yeah, more furniture. More furniture. I was one of the debates when the last plate was issued 20 years ago was, do we keep the words Peace Garden State on the plate? Because that is in the law, that Peace Garden State shall be on the plate. And there was some discussion and even a couple of proposals to remove it, and that caused a uproar amongst folks who were supporters of the Peace Garden, and particularly from the Minot area, because that was regarded as kind of a hotbed of pro-Peace Garden sentiment. Should the Peace Garden State stay on the plate?
I would be open to maybe some of our universities, some of the advertising design departments to have some kind of a contest, come up with, I don't know, maybe 5 or 10 or 20 different ideas, and I would probably be for change. Something that Peace Garden, it's okay, but it's kind of old-fashioned. And I'd be for something, maybe something new, modern, and a change. So when people think of North Dakota, not only being the most successful and prosperous state, but our license plate, you could see it too, instead of just something that's average or boring. I think North Dakota's not average and boring anymore. We're the best.
Should it have an oil derrick on it or something like that?
How about red potatoes? I think that'd be great.
There you go.
Or sugar beets.
Sugar beets. People would be wondering what the sugar beets were, though, I think.
Yeah.
That's
well,
true.
if you've been to some states too, they ask you what the Peace Garden state is.
Yes, that was one of the reasons why people suggested dropping it, because Peace Garden State. Well, what does that even mean? And
right,
we're no longer at war with Canada. I guess.
And we're so much more than the Peace Garden. I mean, it's important, of course, but we're more than the Peace Garden.
Yes, but if that idea comes up, and frankly I don't expect it will, but if it does come up, it'll be interesting to see what kind of Donnybrook ensues. Who should design a new plate? Should be like a public contest or something? What do you think?
Like I mentioned, I think the universities, they're young, creative, some kind of a web design. There's arts department, advertising, promotion people, or anybody. I think just leave it open.
Too, yeah.
We have so many creative people in our state. You look at the artwork in most of our restaurants. I was just across the street, stopped in there briefly to say hi to my wife who was over there, and they have artwork on the wall. I mean, there's a lot of creative people around, and maybe something could come of that.
Could have an open call for license plate designs. I think that'd be rather fascinating.
As long as it was a North Dakota resident that designed it, not someone from out of state. I
that's
agree.
what I was thinking of.
I'd like to have just put the rear plate. So many states just have one license plate in the rear.
Well, there you have. You're talking to you. We should be introduced to Wes Belter. That's been his cause for God knows how
Really?
long.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
Oh, it's Wes one plate Belter.
It would save money.
It would save money.
Yeah,
yes.
you could just go to Legislative Council. They have many copies of that bill that you can introduce.
That's nothing new. Okay.
I'm glad you brought it up. We've been speaking to Senator Tom Campbell. He's a Republican from Grafton, a member of the Senate Transportation Committee. Also, Representative Dan Ruby, chairman of the House Transportation Committee. He's a Republican from Minot. And also, we've been talking to the president of the Greater North Dakota Chamber of Commerce, Andy Peterson. We've been talking about speeding fines and license plates. And thank you, gentlemen, for coming.
Thank you, Dale.